Welcome to Drinks in the Library, the only library where drinks aren't just allowed, they are required. I'm your librarian host, Gigi Howard, and each episode I'll be interviewing a guest about a much-loved book that we will be pairing with a drink for you to enjoy along with us or consider for your next book club meetup. As always, stay curious and support your local library. Hello, Liberation Nation. This week we are discussing Ex-Wife by Ursula Parrott, and I think it might be a story that a lot of you have never heard of. And for that reason, I'm really excited to be bringing it to your attention. It's a story of the Jazz Age and specifically of what it was like to be a woman at that time. I'm joined by Juliana Soltis. She's an internationally acclaimed cellist specializing in forgotten stories of classical music. And her latest release just came out from Parma Recordings. It's called American Woman. And it explores the lost legacy of America's women composers. And it's now streaming across all platforms. When not on the road or recording in the studio, Juliana makes her home in Richmond's historic Churchill neighborhood, where she caters to the whims of her two greyhounds, Rain and CC. And our drink this week is a gin fizz. Just a little disclaimer, fizz drinks have egg white in them, which I learned this week. And I have to admit, I was a little daunted to add egg white into my mixed beverage. But Juliana talked me through it a little bit. And when you shake the fizz, it makes it almost like, it feels kind of like a dessert almost, to be honest with you. The froth is just so fun and special. I did put the directions in the show notes if you want to give it a try. We also made ours with non-alcoholic gin. So for the sober curious out there, that is always an option. We use Monday NA Gin. If you're enjoying the show, please share it with someone that you think would also enjoy it this week. That helps me grow. And also, if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, you can go and give me 5 stars or leave a review. All right, without further ado, here is Ex-Wife by Ursula Parrott. I did actually finish. So good.
It is so good. It's gripping, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Like, it's written, 1929?
Yeah.
And it feels like it could very easily have been written about women living in New York City today. It still feels incredibly modern and incredibly fresh, and I don't think you can say that about every book that was written almost 100 years ago.
Right, yeah. No, it felt so fresh, and I did pick up on, the way that she would write things that seemed very straightforward, but then she would put things in parentheses, and that was sort of like her inner monologue as well. So I thought that was a good tie-in for how the straight to the pointness of her writing style, but then also how she managed to have her little Carrie Bradshaw of and this is how I was really feeling.
I think that's such a great analogy. I definitely thought of Sex and the City when I was reading this book. It's like, oh, this must have been Sex and the City for the Jazz Age. Yeah. It's a female-centered story. It is about modern times in New York. It's about how social standards are changing. It's about how do we as women navigate this world that is changing, and how do we navigate all of the opinions coming our way as to whether or not we are doing it the right way.
Right. And in a world that's not made really for women as well, especially this one that she's living in.
Absolutely. I mean, in the 20s, of course, things are starting to skew a little more in favor of women and in favor of female independence. But this main character, Patricia, she's still living in a world in which the expectation is that you're going to marry some nice young man, you're going to have children, and you're going to be a wife and mother. And when her world falls apart, when her husband decides that he's going to leave her, that he is going to make her as miserable as possible until she will divorce him because he's decided that he's done. suddenly she is cast adrift and she doesn't know what to do. She's caught in this limbo between what she's always been told is reality and her new experience with reality. And I think that's what makes it so gripping now. I know that I certainly have felt more than once in my life. It's like, am I doing this the right way? Is this the way life is supposed to be? Did I take a wrong turn somewhere? You know, and you can wonder, is my experience valid? And the answer, of course, is yes. Your lived experience, what your life is like, is absolutely valid. Maybe it's not what you thought it would be, but that doesn't make it any less real. And it doesn't make it any less of a good life, as Patricia discovers as she goes through this journey in the book.
Yeah. And we're going to keep talking about the book. I do want to talk about our drink. Tell us what we're drinking. I'm super excited at how well we tied it all together.
I think this is a home run. You did really well with this. For everybody out there listening, I gave up spirits about 5 years ago. And so we are enjoying some fantastic non-alcoholic gin fizzes, which is a classic cocktail of the Prohibition era. You know, the name just evokes kind of like glamour and effervescence. And I have to say, Gigi, kudos to you for braving the egg white. You guys can't see it, but these things have like a gorgeous little head of frothy fizz on them, and they're delicious.
They are very good. So, yeah, cheers. I know. So you came in, and I'm like sitting with this cocktail book that I'm like, okay, it says to put egg white in it, and I had the egg whites ready. Like, are we really doing this? You're like, well, I've done it before.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So yeah, no, it's good. It's good, and it's got lemon and simple syrup in as well, and then it's the NA gin we're using, it's called Monday.
Yep, Monday brand non-alcoholic gin, which was a wire cutter recommendation.
Oh, okay.
Usually I find that their recommendations are pretty spot on. It's not like you can go into a store usually and be like, hey, you want to crack that bottle open for me so I can try it? And what I loved about gin as a spirit when I was drinking alcohol was that floral, herbaceous quality. So for anybody who is looking for a good substitute for, dry January or...
It's Sober October now.
Sober October! Yeah. I love it when it rhymes. For the sober curious out there, I thoroughly recommend, and go ahead and be bold and try the gin fizz.
Yes. Yeah, and put the egg white in.
Put the egg white in it.
Yeah, and I was also, as I was reading the book, they do drink gin fizzes. I guess while we're talking about it, that was another thing that kind of struck me was the alcohol use in this book. They would be like, okay, well, so-and-so got home and we had 2 drinks and then we went over to this house and then we had 3 more drinks. And this is before dinner. They had 5 drinks before dinner and then they go to dinner and then they have like 5 more drinks. I was just like, this is... I was reading her son wrote... he wrote the afterword. And he was talking about how this book really does depict the alcoholism or alcohol use of that era.
It's interesting, right? Because, this is the height of Prohibition. So alcohol is technically illegal and not being sold, but apparently was pretty easy to get because, like you mentioned, they are drinking quite a bit. And I have wondered, because it is striking, even more so than in a book like The Great Gatsby, which is that other, very noteworthy book of the Jazz Age. It is, like you said, it's incredible how much they're consuming, how much alcohol they're consuming. And in the case of Patricia, it seems to be almost like an analgesic. She has felt so much in her experiences that she doesn't want to feel anymore. And you could also connect that to the experiences of soldiers coming back from the First World War. Obviously, we did not call it PTSD back then. You called it battle fatigue or war weariness, when men came back with psychological scars. My own great-grandfather, who I never met, my Grandpa Bill's father, was an immigrant and was sent to fight in the First World War, and he came back and unfortunately lapsed into alcoholism because he must have been a sensitive soul, and he could not deal with what he had seen, and he couldn't tell anybody about it. So I think that certainly seems to have made it a hallmark of the times, this trauma.
Yeah, definitely. And we can get into Pat's trauma too. I want to ask you, who were you when you read Ex-Wife? What is it about this book that's special for you?
I think what really resonated for me when I read this was how authentic the female voice sounded. Obviously, almost all authors write women characters, men, women, non-binary writers. And something about the language, the way that Ursula Parrott uses language, the way that Patricia acts, the way that she responds to things that happen to her, the things that she say, they feel very real. Like it could be you, or it could be a friend, someone that you've known. And I find in my own experience as a reader that kind of authenticity in the female voice is hard to come by. I mean, we talk about this a lot with the cinema. Actresses are always saying they want more complex, more authentic female characters, something that portrays the complexity of what it means to be a woman in the modern world, because we're so many things, right? We're working women. We are our mothers, and by the way, that counts as being a working woman too, because that's tons of work. We are sisters and wives and girlfriends and co-workers and helpmeets. We do so much, and it can be difficult to convey all that we are in a character, and I think that it's something that Ursula Parrott just does so brilliantly, and it has really stuck with me how powerful that character of Patricia is.
Yeah, and I do want to add to that, because you said that so well about how many roles we play. It's kind of striking, the title of this book, Ex-Wife, and that is probably one of the first times that anyone gave themselves that title.
I think historically Parrott may have been the first person to use the term ex-wife. And in the book, the character Lucia introduces Patricia to this term of the ex-wife. And for us in the 21st century, ex-wife has very specific connotations. You used to be the wife of someone. But in the book Ex-Wife, to be an ex-wife, it seems to be almost a state of being. It's a description that Lucia comes up with for this situation in which the two of them find themselves, where they're no longer eligible young ladies who have never been with a man. Like Patricia says, nobody brings me violets anymore. They buy me whiskey instead. And yet they're not married. Right. So they're in this weird no man's land, and they're sort of claiming this identity for themselves by saying, "Oh, we're ex-wives."
Yeah. Whether we want to be or not.
Whether we want to be or not, we're gonna stake a claim to the identity and figure out exactly what do you do when things didn't turn out the way you'd always been told they would turn out.
Yeah. And so things didn't turn out for her. She tell us how did she become an ex-wife? I guess it's a good way to lead it.
Well, Patricia is at the beginning of the book. She is in a relationship with Peter, who has been like her college sweetheart. They're married young. They have a child who unfortunately dies in infancy, and they have what at the time was a very outre idea. They have an open marriage, and so Peter has these relationships with other women, and in one moment of weakness, Patricia sleeps with a friend of Peter's, and she decides to tell him, and she discovers that open marriage is really open on one side.
Right.
And Peter decides that he wants a divorce, and Patricia wants to try and make things work, so he becomes increasingly abusive in an attempt to get her to leave him. Which that was very difficult for me to read. There is one scene in particular in which he pushes her through a glass door, and I have always been one of those people, even if it's fantasy, if it's a movie, if it's a TV show, if it's a book, violence like that against women is just extremely difficult to handle, because we know, unfortunately, that even though what we are looking at, what we're reading is a fantasy, it is a very real possibility for us. Still, almost 100 years later, we have all probably known someone who has had to leave an abusive partner, unfortunately.
And of course, at the time, it was treated so differently. It was a little bit dismissed. And going back, I was really struck in the story because they do lose a son, and the way her husband Peter deals with it that was also horrific for me. Because he was so dismissive and almost like glad the baby died because now we don't have to deal with it anymore, kind of attitude.
It was incredibly callous, and you sort of sense the beginning of the end for Patricia and Peter there, because she feels that there is this emptiness, this hole in her life, something that's been taken, and that nothing will ever fill it. And this is a theme that continues throughout the book, Patricia's sense of loneliness, of the loss of things that don't kill her, but which leave her with gaps in her life, with these scars, these wounds that she realizes she's just going to carry. She spends a lot of time trying to go back. Spends a lot of time trying to make things better. She spends a lot of time fantasizing about, someday Peter's going to call me. I'm going to buy all these fabulous clothes so that someday when he calls me, I'm going to be dressed to the nines.
Yeah.
And I think the sort of heroic moment, if we wanted to look at Ex-Wife as a sort of hero's journey for Patricia, is the moment when she realizes that there is no going back, and that trying to recapture this something that she thought her life was going to be is a futile effort. And that's when she's able to, I think, really move on and to focus on living a good and beautiful and happy life, because she lets it all go.
Yeah. And there's a lot more that happens in the story. There's a lot of characters. I do want to shift for a second, because I think another really important aspect of the story is the fact that it was lost to time, and that it has now returned to us. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I am continually amazed at the works of art, literature, music by women which fall by the wayside in spite of the fact that they were highly acclaimed. So, of course, we've all read Gatsby.
Yeah.
Right? It's the standard middle school, high school read, and we read it because it's the great American novel. We read it because it's the novel of the jazz age.
Right.
Except that it wasn't the novel of the jazz age. It's still a fantastic book.
Yeah.
But Nobody read The Great Gatsby when it came out. The New York Times absolutely panned it. They still get a lot of mileage out of the fact that they panned The Great Gatsby, and then it goes on to be this classic. Every once in a while they reprint the review, and I've read it, and it's like, wow, guys, that is really harsh. Why did I read that in 8th grade again? But Ursula Parrott's Ex-Wife was the novel of the Jazz Age. It was originally published anonymously. Mm-hmm. It sells 1 million copies.
Yeah.
It's wildly popular. It is scandalous for the way that it depicts the life of a modern woman in New York City. It is scandalous for the issues that it just confronts head on. The search for the author was quite a while. Sleuths were desperate to know who was this anonymous person who had written this book, and it turns out it was Ursula Parrott. It was written by a woman. And so why is it that we talk about Gatsby, and even the most well-read among us have not read Ex-Wife?
Right.
And I think I wrote to you in an email about this, that I think it's the idea of legacy. Fitzgerald dies fairly young, and his friends and colleagues, when he dies, decide that they are going to do right by him. They are going to get him the recognition, the renown that eluded him in life, and so they make it their mission to champion his legacy and to champion books like The Great Gatsby. Parrott, on the other hand, her personal life was, unfortunately, a series of continuing scandals. She eventually dies in poverty in a charity ward in a hospital after being on the run from the law for about 5 years. And when she dies, there is nobody who is stepping up to say, you know what, she may have had a rough life, but we are going to champion her works, and we are going to make sure that they are not forgotten. So for decades, nobody's reading Ex-Wife unless you came across a first edition in an old bookshop.
Yeah.
Nobody is talking about this book that was really thought to be the most accurate depiction of the Jazz Age. And for me, and for what I do in my professional life, it just underscores how important it is for women artists, women writers, women musicians, composers to have champions, people who will safeguard and promote and celebrate their legacy, because we've seen with Ex-Wife how easy it is for something that's a classic, that's part of our literature and our heritage, just fall into obscurity, fade away.
Right, yeah. And I think I think that is a good tie-in for American Woman that just came out on Friday.
Yep.
Right?
Friday, October 4th.
All right. So tell us about that.
American Woman is my latest album release from Parma Recordings, and as the title suggests, it is all about the untold story of America's women composers who were all highly accomplished, highly acclaimed during their individual lifetimes, but who, like Ursula Parrott, saw their work fall into obscurity following their deaths. And I love the story of the album because it shows that far from being novelties, we tend to look at high-achieving women in the arts as kind of one-offs or sort of, oh, wow, look, isn't that interesting? A woman writing music. But far from being oddities, they represent rather an unbroken tradition within our American music, and that's a living tradition that continues to this day. And for me as an artist, just to know that I'm part of something like that is extremely powerful.
So did you stumble upon some of the music that's in your album? What first drew you into What was the first step of this story, I guess is the question.
Well, I was at home during the pandemic like everyone else, and I very suddenly had a lot of time on my hands, and I decided to start working on a different project. I wanted to explore the idea of American identity in classical music, because when people are describing me, particularly in print, it's always American cellist, Juliana Soltis. And I thought, oh, you know what? I don't really know what it means to be an American cellist. If you're an Italian cellist, there is a sort of a historical lineage of composers like Vivaldi and Boccherini and Verdi, you can say are your own, and they form your identity as a performer. But I realized that as an American cellist, I really didn't know my own repertoire. And I started looking. And as often happens to me, when I started looking, I found a lot more than I had bargained for. I had too many pieces. I had a short list of 20 pieces. Most albums have 4 or 5 pieces on them, and I was told you've got to shorten this, and I was like, I don't know how I can shorten this without compromising the narrative, and I was just like banging my head against the coffee table trying to figure out how I was going to shorten this list. And I realized, in looking at my own list, that for every male composer whose works I knew and had in some cases played, there was a contemporary, almost exact contemporary woman whose works I either knew only peripherally or not at all. And I thought, oh, well, this is the story then, isn't it? That there is this undercurrent, this secret tradition of women who are composing, and I thought, that's it. That's the story. I've got to tell it. I thought nobody is going to let me make this album, but I'm going to do it anyway. And it worked out.
It seems to be going pretty well.
Yeah, it's doing pretty well so far. It's extremely exciting when you do something like this and you're going out on a limb. When you're trying to expand the field of vision for a more complete view of our own history. Sometimes there can be pushback and sometimes it can be intense. I have gotten a few nasty messages. Just like, okay, you said your piece.
Well, in regards to I think it's wonderful. It's hard for me to understand what someone would be upset about.
There was one particular message in which someone suggested that I would do better to focus on being a great musician than to get involved with, quote unquote, all that woke nonsense.
Oh.
And I think the issue there is that wokeness, which was really originally just supposed to mean awareness of what's going on around us. Yeah. Are you awake? Are you paying attention?
Yeah.
Which I'm pretty sure my parents have said to me more than once. It has come to mean to convey a certain fear that we are elevating one person over another for reasons beyond the merits of say, their work or their performance.
Okay.
And I responded to this person, which was not always a good idea, but I felt that it was important. And I said, listen, this isn't wokeness. These women were already famous. Yeah. These women were already acclaimed. They don't need me to elevate them. They're doing fine on their own in that respect. It's just that we've forgotten about them.
Yeah.
It's so easy to forget about something. I mean, good grief, I couldn't find my car keys on my way here and forgot I'd already put them in my bag. That's what happens when I try to prepare ahead of time. I'm just running around looking for the car keys. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with going back in time for something that we've lost. I've done the same with composers who are men. It's about restoring our own cultural heritage. This is something that benefits all of us. It's something that belongs to all of us. It's worth saving.
Absolutely. And of course, it's great to 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 people in general, but American female composers who, for one reason or another, their music maybe isn't getting played as much as it could be. And so that you've done that for them, I think that's great. And I do want to, and I'm going to pause real quick because I can't remember her name, but I want to tie it back to the book.
I love the songs that they put in here. Like, I actually look some of them up once in a while.
Yeah. Rhapsody in Blue.
Yes, I love that they included some of the sheet music.
Yeah.
Right, at the time, it was brand new. It was revolutionary.
Yeah.
This idea that we were going to put jazz in the concert hall, which was scandalous for any number of reasons.
So talk us through the notes within the book, because Parrott includes jazz music within this book.
I think that the inclusion of jazz, which now we're like, jazz. We think soft jazz, we think smooth jazz, we think Kenny G.
Right. That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Yo-Yo Ma.
Yo-Yo. Yeah, come on. Yo-Yo's done some jazz. Yo-Yo's done it all. It's amazing. But, jazz at the time, remember, it's as fresh and as modern and as potentially scandalous as, say, Elvis was in the 50s or the Beatles. That one was always a tough one for me. They're like, oh, their hair is so long. It's like, it really doesn't look that long to me. I've seen pictures of my dad in the 70s, and his hair was like down to his shoulders. But at the time, oh my gosh, those long Beatle haircuts, those boots, as scandalous as Metallica or Ozzy Osbourne. This was shocking music. This was modern music. It was the soundtrack to the modern age that Parrott is writing about. And I think that's, she references jazz. She puts the actual music, the actual notes in the book. It's so much more a visceral part, I think, of her writing than it is, say, for example, in Fitzgerald, where music is not nearly referenced so much as colors. I mean, his writing, in Gatsby, somebody's always analyzing all the different colors that he uses to light his scenes. I think that the music in the book is almost as much a character as the characters themselves. Parrott is using it to score a landscape of modern life.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I wanted to talk a second about a biographer named Marcia Gordon, who, I don't know when it came out, but to me, from what I've understood researching this book, is she's a professor at NC State. It's my home state. Woohoo! And
shut up.
And she became very interested in Ursula Parrott. And I wanted to kind of bring it back to, what you're doing with the music with these female composers. Marcia Gordon also did for Parrott, but because when she first started researching her, Ex-Wife was not in print.
Yeah.
And she wrote the biography on Ursula Parrott. And then since that time, now it's back in print. I forget who's the publisher on here.
Is it McNally?
McNally, yeah, McNally edition. So they have put it back in print, and I heard it's going to be put out in multiple different languages as well, which is really exciting because then it's going back into the world. But so similar to what Marcia did for Parrott, you're doing now as well. How does that feel?
It feels, it can be thrilling. Like I said, to find that you're part of something greater. You yourself are not alone. You are part of this community that has always existed. It can also be infuriating sometimes when you realize that the things that you are going through that are tough are things that everyone else has had to go through, and you read about their experiences and you think, I can't believe they treated her that way.
Yeah.
And of course you can't do anything about it feels like an incredible responsibility because I'm telling someone else's story, someone who is no longer here to speak for themselves, but who, in my case, has left behind music, which can speak for them if it's given a chance. And I feel a great responsibility as a scholar and as a performer to let the composer speak for herself as much as possible. When I was writing liner notes for American Woman, I spent a great deal of time just hunting up quotes from each of my composers about their experiences, about their music, because I can give you my own analysis. I have 4 degrees sitting in a box at my parents' house. I can do all of that stuff. But how much better is it if the composer herself can tell you what she thinks and how she feels?
Yeah.
And it can be difficult to keep ourselves out of the mix.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I'm very involved when I'm playing, and it's my interpretation of their work. But I feel a great responsibility to honor their wishes as much as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's really exciting. I think it's really cool endeavor that you've taken on. Coming just back to the book, just real quick, talking about it. Who would you recommend Ex-Wife to?
I would honestly recommend Ex-Wife to, I think, virtually anyone. I mean, it's such a great story, and it's so well written. Certainly, if you read Gatsby and you love Gatsby and that kind of like now historical novel, the Jazz Age is your jam, definitely read Ex-Wife. You'll love it. It's very much in the same wheelhouse. I mean, I will say that it does deal very starkly with, again, issues of domestic violence, abortion, sexual mores. So it's probably not the thing that you're going to want to give to a younger child, even if they're an advanced reader. So there is a sort of parental warning there. But anyone, I mean, we sometimes think, okay, if it's a book by a woman author, then it must be a book for women, right?
Right.
Well, certainly the character is going to resonate with women differently than it will with men because of our experience. But I think that a well-written story is something that can be enjoyed by anyone and everyone.
Yeah. And going off what you said, I thought it was an incredible snapshot of life at the time. I think sometimes we romanticize or think it was easier then or different. But there were so many things within the story that I was sort of like, there's a scene where her husband, when times are good, they're having to save up $6 to buy him a pair of shoes. And it takes like weeks to buy the shoes.
And she talks about a little bottle of Hooligan's perfume that he buys her, and that even though it was just a small bottle of perfume, he must have spent like 3 weeks' salary on it. And haven't we all been there, especially when we're in our 20s?
Yeah,
where every little thing we're scrounging pennies and trying to scrape by, and it all still feels incredibly relevant to our experience today. Not everybody was going out to the Ritz and dancing the night away and drinking towers of champagne.
Yeah. There are still people in the beginning of the story. They are in their 20s, and so they're scraping by. But I thought it was a great snapshot of that time too. So.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It does feel more realistic. I mean, again, I love Gatsby, and it's such a well-written book. But there's an intense fantasy aspect to it. They're living out there on Long Island, and these fantastic and fabulous parties that Nick gets asked to finally when Gatsby realizes who he is,
right? And
hopes that then through him he'll finally get Daisy, his long lost love, to come. So there's just fantasy from beginning to end. It's Gatsby's fantasy, and I would say that Ex-Wife, like you said, it's a much more of a snapshot of real life. It was Bright Lights, Big City before that came out.
Yeah.
Very, very much in the same vein.
Yeah. Is there anything we didn't touch on the book that you were hoping we'd get to?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think we hit all the big stuff.
Okay, good.
We got our gin fizzes.
Yeah.
and we've talked about, the more things change, the more they stay the same. But that's great. I think, isn't that the test of a great work of literature, that it has themes and elements that, taken from one decade to the next, still resonate with all of us.
Yeah, and like I said, I was not expecting this to be so as readable as it is.
Yeah.
So I was pleasantly surprised, so thank you. And we talked about your work. I just want to give you one more chance if you've got anything you want to put a spotlight on, or what you've got coming up, if you want to share anything.
Oh my gosh. Well, one thing I've got coming up that I'm very excited about is in March of 2025. I am going to be performing at Bruno Walter Hall at the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts at Lincoln Center.
Cool.
I'm going to be performing works from the album, and we're going to highlight the connection between the works on the album and the library. At least two of the composers on the album, their music can only be found if you go into the archives at the Library for the Performing Arts at Lincoln Center. And I will talk about my undying love of libraries until I'm blue in the face. Because, especially young musicians, young scholars, there's a tendency to assume now that anything you need can be found online through Google. That's not the case. Yeah. Library collections are massive. Even the smallest library has thousands of books. So you talk about a repository like the Library for the Performing Arts. There is no way they can digitize all of that and then have it in a searchable catalog. You've got to go there. You've got to interact with the wonderful librarians. You've got to look at the real manuscripts. There's untold treasures waiting to be found in all of our libraries. And again, it's the story of us as a people. It's the story of our art and our literature and our music, and we should care very much about it. So I'm super excited to go and do that. I think the folks at the library are excited too. And it's going to be Women's History Month.
Yeah,
so it's
perfect.
Like the trifecta, the total nerd out.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. I'm jealous. I mean, that sounds like a great time, and
it's going to be fun.
Awesome.
It's going to be wild times at the library.
Yeah. I mean, I've had a few myself. Oh, yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here with me tonight.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was so much fun. And again, I have to give you your props on the non-alcoholic gin fizz. Guys, again, I wish you could see these. They are amazing, and they were pretty tasty too. So
fresh lemon. I think that's the key.
Fresh lemon's the key. Yes.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Thank you for spending some time with me and my guest for an episode of Drinks in the Library. For more information about the show, you can find us on Instagram at Drinks in the Library, on the World Wide Web, drinksinthelibrary.com, or shoot me an email at drinkspod@gmail.com. Until next time, cheers.